objectives for today. Oh, also PS, they're in your handout, sorry, in your workbook, there is the biggest handout of them all, which is the California Native Plant Maintenance Data Sheet. That one was helpful for last week with pests, but also this week, it's a great resource. It's like all the native plants essentially listed, and it has several pages that go through essentially like a description of them, their pruning season, what type of pruning cuts you can make with them, pests that are commonly found on them. It's a really great resource. If you guys haven't looked at it, I would really get familiar with it. And it's also just a great cheat sheet if you just kind of like can't remember something, just looking it up in this data sheet, super helpful. So yeah, that was the handout for this week. Essentially, that's like kind of corresponds to this week's lesson. So feel free to review that later, or I guess during also. So the objectives for this session with pruning will be, basically we're gonna go over the reasons to prune. We're gonna talk about the seasons for pruning and the appropriate techniques, you know, the different types of pruning cuts, and then some kind of like basic proper hygiene for your tools and whatnot. And we will hit at the very end kind of some talk, because we're kind of go through quite a bit of the like just kind of the standard book stuff. And then we'll talk a little bit specifically about Ceanothus, Manzanita, and sages at the end, since they are all such large groups, and pretty much most native gardens have one of the three, if not all. And also I want to highlight, I would really recommend the workshop if it makes sense for you, because it's going to be the hands-on experience, and they will be covering kind of a little bit different stuff. Like we're really going to be talking about like types of pruning cuts and when to prune and how to kind of think about it. But it really doesn't cover some of the things that you're just going to see in real life, you know, or hands-on experience. So highly recommend it, especially if you're like a kind of a learner that is like a, you know, experiential learner. Anyway, so that's what we'll talk about today. So just jumping right in, reasons to prune would be one of these three options essentially, which is one would be rejuvenation. So essentially stimulating any new growth or removing unproductive like woody growth, but essentially like rejuvenating the plant, you know, trying to encourage this new growth. A second reason to prune would be aesthetics or shaping. It's kind of the same, you know, shaping whatever plant into the shape you want it to be. And this kind of shaping pruning would include like removing dead wood, same, and or diseased or spent flowers, because maybe it just doesn't look nice, you know, so you would be removing those things. Redirecting growth would also potentially affect shaping. Any kind of thing where you're like shaping into a hedge or creating a tree structure or just accentuating its natural growth habit, this would all fall into like shaping, you know, that would be a reason. A third reason would be plant health. So, you know, improving like air circulation or removing diseased things, also removing any cross branches that are maybe touching. This is all under the umbrella of plant health, you know, or potentially like mitigating some damage that has befallen whatever plant, you know, so potentially just mitigating that damage via pruning, or or even mitigating like overplanting. You know, you might come across a garden that's overplanted, and for the rest of the plant's health you would potentially be you know, compensating for overplanting by the removing plants or pruning or whatnot. So those are the three basic categories for reasons to prune. Seasons to prune. Seasons would be, so generally we've categorized the different plants into different groups based off of their dormancy period. And that's because generally speaking, you're going to be pruning when the plants are dormant or when they're their slowest growing period, and generally that falls kind of after they flower. And again, I'm saying generally here because obviously there's thousands of different native plants and they are different, but this is just kind of a generalization that like we want to generally, when it's dormant or it's slowing growth period, that's typically after it flowers. but not always. And it also depends on your goals. So something like potentially there's something that you want to keep the seeds or the fruit on it, you know, for like a toy on that has like a beautiful fruit that comes after the flower, of course, or any kind of seed that you want to highlight or something like that, like a mountain mahogany that has that like, you know, kind of beautiful like wispy kind of seed head. So that is something you wouldn't want to prune right after it flowers, because you actually want to leave it on the tree so that it, or the tree or shrub, so that it develops and stays on the tree, right? So this is just generalizations, but again, it's like kind of thinking about each plant and how like what is their goals with each plant, right? So what's going to follow is a bunch of categories of plants and more generalizations about pruning them. But nearly all of them, like I said, can be pruned in their dormant period. Let's see, the first one is, we have winter deciduous species. This might be a typo because there are a couple of summer deciduous guys in here. Hold on a second, gotta move a window over. So, but anyway, it's the same point, which is winter deciduous species, they are losing their leaves. Winter ones are losing their leaves in winter, they're going dormant. And our summer deciduous species would be going dormant in the summer, right? So I'm just going to talk about deciduous, but most of these represented, or most of the plants listed here are winter deciduous, but something like a lot of the ribes, the gooseberry and currants are summer deciduous, or the virgin's bower there, the Clematis passiflora, that's a summer deciduous. But again, these you want to prune during their dormant period. So a good way to kind of think about it and remember it is they're not going to have all of their foliage, so they will be easy to evaluate. Like the structure of them will be much easier to evaluate with them, like, you know, naked with no leaves on them. So again, there's all these listed examples: redbud, maples, desert willow, all the deciduous oaks, California walnut, sycamore, cottonwoods, elderberries, spicebush, the currants and gooseberries, except for Catalina perfume. That one is not a deciduous one. That I believe is an evergreen one. Anyway, again, there's always going to be exceptions. But yeah, so this group we want to prune during its dormant period, which generally here would be winter deciduous or summer. So winter or summer based off of its dormancy. Oops. The next group they kind of categorize is conifers, and these ones, generally it's just incense cedar, California juniper, and pinyon pine. They can be pruned any time of year generally, and you want to shape them after their kind of new growth, their needles kind of harden off. So when we say shape, we kind of mean like if you're hedging or kind of doing this like light pruning to kind of fix the shape of it. But generally you could, you know, cut a big woody branch off that maybe was in the way or something like that any time of year. Let's see what else notes I have. With conifers, you want to avoid cutting into the old wood. I mean, if you're removing a branch, that's one thing, right? But you want to avoid cutting into old wood because they generally don't re-sprout. So don't cut back into some branch thinking like, oh, it's going to sprout from here. You might just have like a dead spot there. So generally, we don't want to cut into the old wood with them. And also conifers, they like need unobstructed space around them. They don't like touching neighbors, and they tend to have dieback actually if they're touching and rubbing on neighbors. So I'm sorry. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but I didn't turn my phone off. So back to conifers. Yeah, they need this unobstructed space. I think that's pretty much it for just starting there. Yeah, any structural problems you would want to address as like after the needles harden off type of thing, you know, if you're controlling for size or something like that. The next group would be our semi-evergreen species. This category, so again, these categories are just kind of, you could have more, like you could definitely break this out into like 7 or even like 10 categories if you wanted. We've just made 5 here, I believe. So we're kind of combining a bunch of things, but these semi-evergreen species also kind of include like summer deciduous species, like a Matalia poppy or or like a monkey flower. But essentially semi-evergreen species are generally green all year, but they might under certain conditions lose their leaves, you know, or go sort of dormant, like or like something like a California sagebrush, like Artemisia californica. It kind of changes its leaves over the season. You know, in the beginning in spring, they're very kind of like lush and wispy and have quite a bit of growth and length. And then during summer, they've really shrunk down. And depending on your watering, they can get pretty crispy. So we would consider this like a semi-evergreen species. But these guys, you want to prune during their period of slowest or no growth. So again, there's a big array of members in this grouping, but essentially knowing what period is there, like when they're growing the most, like I was saying, like Artemisia californica, it's growing in springtime. You can do some pinching actually in springtime, but doing any like major pruning, like, you know, for structure or whatnot, you want to do when it's not growing. Let's see, do I have any other notes on that one? Yeah, but the ones listed here would all be potentially, yeah, pruning during the periods of slowest growth and whatnot. Also, Enselias kind of fall into this grouping too, given that we don't have any other specific groups here. Let's see. The next group is evergreen herbaceous perennials and shrubs. This is this is like where anyone who's not losing their leaves is kind of falling into. And these guys you want to shape after they flowered. So like I said, generally after they flowered is when their slowest period of growth is. So you want to shape them after their flower and then rejuvenate in fall. And what that means is like any of the bigger kind of cuts, bigger pruning things you're going to be doing are going to fall into fall. But if you're just doing shaping, like light pruning, that would happen right after flowering. So again, there's a lot of plants listed here. So knowing when that period of flowering happens is important. It's different for each of them, right? But yeah, the list is long. It's lilac verbena, coffeeberry, we have toyons, all the like Ceanothus manzanita sage. There's plenty of members in that one, in this category too. And we will go over those three at the end. I think I already mentioned that actually. But anyway, holly leaf cherry, many of the buckwheats fall into this, jojobas, Freemantia, mountain mahogany. It's endless. So this grouping, again, it's shaping after they flower and rejuvenating, doing the bigger things in the fall. The last category is long blooming plants, which it's not really it's just a category for this situation. But essentially those like we said in the previous slide, the evergreen herbaceous ones you want to prune after they or shape them after they flowered. But for those that flower for a long period, you can generally like prune them after that first flush of flowers. So they kind of will be flowering for a long period of time, and you can generally do that once the biggest kind of like flush happens. You can start pruning them, and most of these you want to start deadheading, which we'll get into the different types of cuts, but that kind of encourages a longer bloom. So you can, the bush poppy, island snapdragons, penstemons, you can start deadheading those once they start flowering, and pinching them. Actually, like island snapdragon, you can pinch those regularly. And let's see, anything else? Yeah, this is, I don't really like this category because it's a little, I don't feel like it helps classify them, but going with it, guys. So long blooming plants generally after the first flush. Now we'll talk about the ways to prune, so the different pruning cuts. First there is, let's see, I have a note here. What is that? Oh yeah, actually, the resources are actually in your handout, but two really helpful resources if you guys if people like books still, for anything about pruning or pest management, there's this one that Theodore Payne helped develop, and I believe they sell it, but it's Care and Maintenance of Southern California Native Plant Gardens. This one it's listed in your handout, and then also Carol Bornstein's book, The California Native Plants of the for the Garden. Both of these mention pruning in them, and pruning by the plant. So like if you just want to look up a specific plant and be like, what's this have to say on pruning, or and also pests. So those are both really great resources for that, and they are listed, but I just wanted to remember to mention it. Anyway, different pruning cuts. So the first one is deadheading, which is this removal of individual spent flowers essentially before the seeds mature. So just removing the spent flowers, this is usually on kind of like a, wait, what am I? Yeah, so these ones are usually like, this can prolong the flowering season for like annuals and non-woody perennials, but it can also just give a tidier appearance to ones to like our trees and shrubs and stuff like that, it might not prolong their flowering season, but it does make them look tidier. So something like Clarkias and monkey flowers and Verbena lilacina or coral bells, those can all benefit from, or any of the sunflowery type guys, those all benefit from deadheading, and you're just removing the kind of the spent or like busted flower, like the burnt out flower. And then like a sage or something, it's not necessarily going to, like I said, have a longer flowering season, but you can remove the flower head, the spent flowers, just to kind of give it that, nicer look. Mowing, everybody I'm sure is familiar with this, which is just, using a lawnmower basically to cut down plants. It's mostly with grasses. And as you guys know, it kind of has that lawn look that, has been so popular for so many decades now. But essentially, fescues, you can mow. Fescues, you can mow once or twice a year. And then something like a blue grama, you could mow monthly in the summer and just like cut it back to 3 inches, monthly. So it's not very common in shrubs. Like I said, it's just mostly for grasses, but I think there are like a Baccharis pilularises that can handle it, but either way, maybe you don't want to get into that. So next is edging. Edging is just pruning ground covers back to the edge of a path or a sidewalk or whatever hardscape you want to keep clear. And usually, so with these, you like with a yarrow or like a beach strawberry, you can use like a string trimmer or an edger, the motorized ones. You could just go through and actually use the trim line with that, the trimmer with that. But with ground covers like salvias or like a Dana Point buckwheat or in this example, the Yankee Point ceanothus, or even like a Monterey carpet manzanita, those ones, you don't want to cut them all back to the same place like a string trimmer would do or an edger would do, because if you do that, you basically unintentionally create this dead zone, because you basically are just cutting it back and then you're encouraging the growth upward, and essentially just create this like strange dead zone right at the edge. It kind of looks like, you might see that in junipers a lot. I don't know if everyone's seen that, but it's just like a nice chunk of dead zone where they just keep like edging or hedging or something like that. So anyway, with these types, like with sages and the ceanothus and all those that I listed, you want to cut the stems back unevenly back into the main body of the plant. So that will be a little bit more time consuming, and it won't just be like something you can, pass through with an edger. Think of it as like the like hard haircut. That's like with the string line, just like the bowl cut. And then the salvias and stuff, that's like more like layering, if anyone even uses that kind of metaphor. But you like don't want to necessarily have like a perfect line with the ceanothus and manzanitas and sages and whatnot. So that's edging. Thinning or lifting is this is also just called selective pruning in other books, but essentially thinning is just removing the entire stems and branches. And the idea with this is to open up the structure for any like air circulation and light, and create a certain shape, and also removing any dead material for like fire safety or aesthetics or whatnot, and all potentially removing cross branches. This is like, well, the activity you're mostly doing. This is pruning. This is selective pruning. So yeah, this is, most plants fall into this category. Manzanitas, ceanothus, toyon, rhuses, all the rhuses like lemonade berry and mountain mahogany. Maybe some of the larger buckwheats you might do a little thinning, but yeah, ideally you're just kind of doing a lot of shaping this way. Pinching is just removing the stem tip right when the new growth is coming on, or potentially like right after it's flowered. But this is to encourage the fuller growth. So you're just kind of pinching back the stem, and usually what it does is the way it establishes this denser kind of branching habit is when you pinch it back, the buds right below the where you cut it back, those will be encouraged to sprout. So essentially it's like they fork usually or something like that. And then you have like a branching pattern as opposed to a straight stem. This is really common, and basically most young plants and perennials can take pinching when they're young, right? Because most of these young plants that we're getting from the greenhouse or from a nursery, they might just they have that cute little thing, like it's almost like Charlie Brown tree, like one stem, and you really want to encourage them when they're young to start branching. So that's when you would be doing this pinching generally to, like I said, establish this branching habit and kind of like form the tree for its future. Next is heading back. Heading back is just cutting back of all the stems on a plant. So you're just cutting them back. Either it can be a light cutting back or a hard one. Most light would just mean you're only cutting it back so much, and hard would be maybe taking it much further back, maybe even to the base. So heading back is generally, like most of our shrubs can take a light heading back, and fewer of them can take a hard one. But essentially, again, much like pinching, it's trying to create this like thicker growth and put on new growth, right? And especially when doing heading back, since you are technically kind of doing the whole plant, you want to keep in mind the plant's shape and its like general kind of growth habit. Because if you just kind of start heading back each one equally and not look like standing back and looking at it, you might kind of go ape wild there and like forget like, what is the shape that I want? What's the shape I want to make here? What's my goal? And also like maybe you might be correcting something. So if you have like a lopsided tree, you don't want to head back as much on one side so that you continue with the lopsided tree, right? So it's like making sure to step back and look at something when you're doing the whole tree. Yeah, let's see. Okay. Coppicing. Coppicing is, this is generally used with just already established plants. It's basically the cutting of a woody plant to the ground or within 6 inches of the ground. So this is like a really extreme cut. And like I said, these are usually for established plants. This is usually to like reinvigorate the older plants, and what it does is it produces all this like upright growth, all these upright shoots. So the idea here is just to reinvigorate maybe an older plant. So that's why it would be done with like a woody older plant. This is like, chamise, like Western redbud, we mentioned, maybe a toyon. If you had, say you had like a tree structured toyon, but you want like that bushy sprout one, then you could coppice it to like recreate or to create a new structure. Matalia poppy is another one. It's not really a woody plant, but that one you do cut back to 6 inches of the ground, and that you do annually, and it sprouts back up with all of its new growth. Some other ones that aren't, again, they're not woody plants, but it's the same method, like essentially coppicing is just like extremely cutting back the plant, would be like a California sunflower or California fuchsias. Fuchsias are known for, well, not known, I guess, but California fuchsias, you cut back to the ground so they flower late summer, late fall, and then they get all kind of brown and messy looking, and that's when you would cut them back, and you cut them back to like an inch, and essentially you just leave whatever little green growths. They do grow by rhizomes and from their base of wherever the green tip is. And if you don't cut back these the fuchsias, what you end up doing is essentially that the new growth for next year grows on that like big mess of a brown of old growth. So then you'll just have this like hairy, messy brown mess, and next year I'm saying, and then you'll have like little bit of green growth on the tip. So actually with fuchsias, it's like coppicing is necessary for the maintenance, unless you want that, big pile of brown mess. So yeah, this is coppicing, essentially this extremely cutting this back to the ground. I have a bunch listed that can take coppicing also. There's like chamise, I have basket rush, willow, cottonwood. The green bark ceanothus, that's the one with the burl, the Ceanothus spinosus. That has a burl, so when you coppice it, the nascent buds in the burl sprout up. Jojoba, Eastwood manzanita, lots of trees can, there's lots of examples of this. Shearing or hedging, you generally wouldn't, so the picture here is like of a hand pruner, but this is like hedging, like with those hedging shears that, you use two hands to do. Shearing or hedging is just pruning something into like a formal hedge. And you're essentially just kind of like cutting it, I don't want to say willy-nilly, but you're not like specifically cutting back a branch or anything. You're just shearing it like this to create a shape or to create a hedge. Generally, the hedges, you want them to be a bit wider on the bottom than the top, so that light gets down to the bottom and you're not unintentionally kind of creating no light down below. And yeah, you want to just make sure you're not creating any dead spaces anywhere. This hedging and shearing, you kind of do like 2 to 3 times a year, because you have to like keep this shape, right? Some things that can handle shearing would be, again, like chamise, maybe like a McMinn manzanita, a sunset manzanita, coyote brush, hurricane point ceanothus that could also take it. The Yankee point ceanothus that we had in a picture earlier, those can just take like a shearing. Pacific wax myrtle, scrub oaks, coffeeberry, spiny redberry, the rhuses, like a Tecate cypress, a hollyleaf cherry, they can take some shearing. Again, I know I'm just listing things, but it is in your data sheet if you guys like specifically want to know if a plant can take shearing. Next we have topiary, which this is like extreme shearing into like, like the animals and the funny shapes and stuff like that. I really don't know how in demand topiary is at this point. It feels like a really dated thing from like, I guess I just think of like Edward Scissorhands or something like that. So I'm not sure how much clients will ask for this, but it does take years to accomplish. And the only kind of representatives of native plants that can kind of handle topiary, because topiary, you are doing quite a bit of cutting. So again, it would be these ones that can kind of handle shearing type things, like the coyote brush, the hollyleaf cherry, the spiny redberry, the scrub oak, the chamise, California bay laurel. These kind of individuals can handle like this kind of like extreme shearing, essentially. And then lastly, there's espaliering, which is the training of a plant along a wall or fence. And like, if somebody wanted to put it in a narrow space, something like that. Generally, this is a very pruning heavy technique. So you're doing quite a bit of cuts so that it can keep this shape. So we don't generally see it with our native plants, because so much pruning actually invites pathogens, right? We don't want to be pruning things all the time. But some natives that can potentially be espaliered would be like ceanothus. There are some ceanothus, there are fremonodendrons, toyons, and redbud. But yeah, generally our warm weather and it doesn't really lend itself to the kind of pruning heaviness of espaliering, but it's an option. I guess I mean, I think we have plenty of time. I guess I'll just go, well, what are we at? 5:30? Oh, we got like tons of time. I guess I'll just keep going and then we can take a break in a little bit. Uh, let's see, pruning hygiene and tools. So hygiene is really important with pruning and just in general. We talked about this all last week. There are so many fungal and viral and bacterial diseases that can be spread to native plants via your dirty tools. So being sure to clean your tools between sites is as much as possible is really important. And then also if between cutting, especially if you are working with like a diseased plant, you want to be cleaning your pruning tools by either dipping them or spraying them with some kind of like disinfectant solution. And I'm sure everyone's familiar with this with COVID times, but bleach works as obviously as a sterilizing solution. It works as if you dilute it somewhat, but it does damage your tools over time. So something like rubbing alcohol or Lysol might make more sense. And you just want to be sure that you are drying them or wiping them off or drying them off once after you've disinfected them so that they don't so you're not applying this like disinfectant to the plants, right? You don't want to be applying it directly to the plants or getting it on them. You just want to be sterilizing your tools. Let's see. Okay, so tools, keeping them sharp is important, not just for like the ease of use, but for avoiding plant damage. So when you have a sharper blade, you have a cleaner cut. And the duller your blade is, the more you're actually kind of like crushing the plant stem that you might be cutting as opposed to cutting it. And that means you're actually damaging more surface area, right? So if you cut it, you're just like, you want the cleanest cut you can get so that it can heal quickly. And if you have a dull blade that's like cutting / crushing, you're actually kind of creating more damage and potentially it's like slower for the plant to heal. So nice sharp tools is key. And this should go without saying, but using the tools safely is obviously an important step. And then generally you want to use hand tools rather than power tools whenever it makes sense. And that's because obviously the hand tools kind of allow for that closer observation with the plants. And it's just you're kind of maintaining the sanctity of the space with sound pollution and whatnot, but also it's kind of sometimes the most appropriate way to prune. So a lot of our native plants can't take like a motorized shearing or something like that. So the hand tool is the kind of the best option and like the most appropriate method for it. Pruning tools. The kind of most common ones you'll be using would be these ones listed here, like hand shears or pruners. You have this top left corner are the hand shears. These are for like stems or branches that are 1/4 of an inch in diameter or smaller. There's generally kind of two types of pruners. There's the top one, the bypass pruner, and that bottom, well, the top left corner, but the two red-handled ones. So there's the bypass pruner and the anvil pruner. The bypass pruner is kind of like a scissor, like scissors. This is the one you want to be using generally with pruning. It's a cleaner cut because of this like scissor situation that it has. And then anvil pruners, it's just the blade kind of coming down on another piece of metal or whatever. Not metal, but essentially it's not like a scissor with two blades. So these anvil cutters are more likely to crush your plant stem or whatnot. So it's kind of better you might want to use those for like removing dead wood or something like that, not using for like stems that you want to cut cleanly. Loppers are the pictures there of the top right corner, which would be just for any branches that are 3/4 of an inch in diameter or larger. And then pruning saw would be for anything that's like 3/4 of an inch or larger in diameter. That's the bottom left. And then the hedging shears this is what I was talking about with the picture. You don't necessarily want to be hedging with pruners, because that would take a really long time and probably hurt your hands. And the hedging shears would be something that you use with hedging. Is there, oh, the string line trimmer. I don't have a picture of one, but I figured you guys all know what those look like. They're just the kind of motorized trimmers that are really commonly used with lawns to edge. So I figured you guys know what those were. And then the pole pruner, lastly, the picture on the bottom right, which is just essentially like a pruner for any unreachable branch. And it has a pole that like a telescopic pole thing that goes up, and you can just prune things that are hard to reach. Again, this goes with the working with tools safely, but don't use the pole pruner around power lines at all. Like that would be not using your tool safely. I think we could do a break. We totally have, I know it's very early, but there's not a whole ton. Let's do like I guess we could do like a 10-minute break if we want. So 5:50. I think we're going to be done really early today. We don't have much more in terms of, we can do a long Q&A, I suppose. Catherine, do you know if the workshop is like all the time slots are full or not yet?
Not as of earlier today, we had, I think, 5 signups for the first and last session and like 12 signups for the middle session. So I think there's time slots available for all of them. So if somebody hasn't signed up yet, feel free to sign up. We're going to do all the things that Claire is talking about, but like in person, and you'll be able to see the plants in action and ask really specific questions, both based on things you're seeing in the landscape or questions you have about stuff at home or your clients' yards. So it's definitely your time to ask all those specifics and get to practice as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys have available plants for everyone to prune, correct?
Yes, yeah. So
That's
there's
cool.
going to be the opportunity for you guys to, depending on the time of year that this workshop would be, we have like obviously there are slightly different pruning needs, but we've actually held back pruning certain things in the demonstration garden for the purposes of being able to demonstrate it with you guys and have you guys help us cut things back and see the different techniques for coppicing or dealing with sages, or what do you do with a big limb of a tree or things like that. So we're going to kind of do a little bit of an overview and have it also be directed by your questions and your specific needs and wants. So
yeah, I think I was saying this last week, but it's like I feel like pruning is a particularly like confusing sounding on like just via PowerPoint, and so much easier just and simpler to understand when you're like, oh, just cut that, I get it, okay, I can see it. Whereas like trying to explain it almost makes it more complicated than it is.
Yeah, it's harder on PowerPoint and it's harder virtually on PowerPoint. So I think you're doing great.
Oh, I had a question here that's like, what tools should they bring? Should they bring their own pruners?
Bring your own pruners. As far as just like handheld pruners, that will be really helpful. We will, I'll still have we'll have some tools of other kinds available, but your hand pruners will probably be the things we're going to be using the most. And so if you each have your own, that would be ideal. And that way we also wouldn't have to share back and forth as much considering COVID. Yeah, but everyone just, wear your masks. We're going to be outdoors. And but it should be, and then we'll space people out if we need to based on the activity. So
cool. Yeah, I feel like that was going to be a fun workshop. I guess all the workshops are funner than just sitting in front of a computer.
Yeah.
It's like Zoom fatigue,
Yeah. And then somebody on the chat asked about how to deal with rusty tools, and I guess somebody recommended Toolbox Buddy. It lubricates and dissolves rust. And then I've also seen a DIY like diluted molasses that you leave your rusty tool in this diluted molasses. You can like YouTube it and like you leave it for like 2 weeks in there, and it does a pretty good job from the videos that I've seen. Oh, somebody says baking soda and lemon juice. Depends on how attached you are to your tools.
Right, yeah.
I would just be like, get a new tool, it's fine. But some people like them, keep their same tool alive for a long time, which is a good ethic to have.
Also the like Fiskars and stuff, you can actually take them apart and like kind of re-grease them every year and like get them all nice and shiny if you're into that. Some of them come apart so that you can keep them kind of up to date in Kansas City style.
And somebody says Coca-Cola also works. So think about that when you're drinking Coca-Cola. It can dissolve rust. I actually know somebody who, I know somebody who knew somebody who drank soda, like 2 6-packs every day and never drank water and only drank Coke. And at the age of 18, his intestines were completely perforated, and he died.
Oh my God, that's horrible.
So that's that for you.
Yeah. I know here, I've had people say that you can use Coke to clean like that little white buildup on your battery, your car battery. And I was like, wait, we're cleaning car batteries with something we drink? Like this can't be okay. So yeah.
Somebody made a comment, too bad there's no planting demo practicum. I have not been around for all the workshops. So if that has not happened, and there is no planting demo, we can incorporate a planting demo on Saturday.
There was supposed to be a planting demo part in the irrigation one. Obviously there, but it is in the teacher's notes for the irrigation one. I don't know if Jade, if you were able to make it to it, but maybe they didn't do it in yours. But there was supposed to be a planting demo in the irrigation workshop.
Okay.
No, there wasn't. I went to the irrigation one. Not in the section I went to.
Okay. That's a bummer.
We'll do it. Are you going to come on Saturday?
Yes.
I'll do it for you. We'll do it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of handy. It's also, I mean, maintenance is obviously comprises of a lot of things, and we're going to be focusing on pruning, but everything's kind of tied together, and the health of the plant starts at the time you plant it, and kind of informs the whole growth of it. So we can do a quick demo on that for sure.
Cool. Good job speaking up. We got get it in there.
Yeah, please always give your feedback. It helps. This is the first round of this program, and so we need to hear your feedback so that we make sure that we're refining it all the time.
Right.
Oh, propagating native plants. You wish propagating native plants was part of this program. It would be cool, but since it's just about maintenance and it's more geared towards getting the maintenance labor and knowledge base kind of up to speed on native gardens, it isn't a part of this. However, seed collecting is kind of a part of a maintenance thing, so we can talk a little bit about that on Saturday, about what time of year is nice to collect seeds off of your plants. And then just keep an eye out for the propagation workshops. They've been less than normal at Theodore Payne just because of COVID, and it's very hard to do a propagation workshop over Zoom. But they do seed propagation as well as cuttings propagation classes. They do those, so keep an eye out for that.
Great, thank you. I'm going to. It's 5:50. We're going to finish up here, and we can just do a long Q&A afterwards. But okay, so this is getting it into the putting it together, but just talking about the sages, the Ceanothus and the Manzanita. So something like this is, again, I don't know if I would put it this way, but this is how the slide is, so I'm going to work with it. But essentially, there are like over 1,000 species of sages, and most of them are somewhat woody. And you want to avoid cutting into older wood on sages because they generally don't resprout, but it's not always the case, but generally. And then, and you can kind of remove those old flower stalks any time of year. If it's got an old flower stalk on it, you can remove that. But we're talking about like cutting into wood for pruning, that you don't want to do. And so here we have like the reason to prune. So we had those 3 reasons, like health could be one, or rejuvenation. So health would potentially be like shaping to avoid crown splitting. A lot of 1 or 2-year-old sages split or break from the weight of all the new growth, especially like the new flowers. And that's something that you could prune. You could prune each stem to prune each stem back, or remove them completely to like kind of encourage the plant to basically to lighten the load, lighten that load and encourage like kind of the strength of the plant in a slower way. So that would be, that would be something that you would do late summer or winter, because that's after, depending on which stage and when they flower, right? So generally after they flowered, so late summer, winter, you could prune back the stems. Something like rejuvenation, it says encouraging rebloom, but it typically don't rebloom, but it does kind of help with, what was it? I lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. Rejuvenation. Anyway, so I'm thinking rejuvenation though more with the pinching. So especially those younger plants. So removing back cutting back into the stems to rejuvenate them. With pruning, yeah, I said here it's late summer, so you could also be doing kind of like late, like fall, early winter. I mean, late summer, it's all kind of similar. And the idea is you're doing it before or just as it's putting on its new growth. And that's when you would be doing any rejuvenation kind of cuts. So that's the, yeah, essentially and then I have here the techniques: tip pinching, deadheading, heading back. Like I said, you can deadhead or remove the flower stalks at any point in the year. And so some examples would be like a Cleveland sage. Like Cleveland sages tend to be pretty vigorous, so you can actually cut them back, in fall or whatnot. You can cut them back like 50 to 30% even, and that's because they're very vigorous, and each year they're gonna re-put that growth back on. And when you cut them back so much, you would be like cutting back from the top and just leaving a couple or a few nodes along the stem so that they sprout from there. So they can take this kind of like heavier pruning annually. But something like a purple sage or black sage, Munz's sage, Brandigi's sage, these guys, you definitely want to pinch them when they're young. I mean, most all of them you want to pinch when they're young. And these ones you might do like a third or a quarter. You can cut them back annually. And those ones, though, they tend to lose vigor over time. And so you would kind of chill on these harder cuts as they get older, and maybe not be cutting them back so much as they start to like kind of lose vigor. Like that's what I'm saying. So like a Cleveland sage has a little bit more vigor, and these other ones like a purple and black sages tend to over time be a little less vigorous. So they're all kind of different, but they're all kind of the same, So, and something like a white sage, you really aren't pruning very much at all. You're just removing the old flower stalks, the big long flower stalks. But in terms of pruning, they don't tend to need much. You do want to pinch them when they're young to create that nice dense branching habit. But otherwise, not a whole lot of pruning. I know there's thousands of sages, but we can't go through all of them. And like Catherine said, the workshop, if for anyone who wasn't here for, when we were talking, the workshop will be great. And then you can also kind of guide it yourself by being like, hey, I see this sage over here. How would you prune that? Or what's the deal with this one? So, or come with your questions prepared. But I think the workshop would really lend itself to anything specifically you want to know, or and also that hands-on experience. So next is Ceanothus. Let's see. So reasons to prune would be like aesthetic in this, which would be like, if you're shaping it, maybe it's a ground cover, so you might be edging it, or potentially it's as a hedge. So these would all be aesthetic reasons. And you would do this after they flowered. We know there's some early and later flowering Ceanothus. So there's not like a one date, right? There's not 1 month to do it. It's just based off of which variety you have. And you typically want to remove the flower cluster, the old flower crust. I was going to say cruster. You want to remove the old flower cluster, and you don't want to wait too long, because essentially they'll start growing after that flower cluster. And then you'll just have this like kind of like leafless stem, and then the new growth, and it kind of becomes this weird leggy thing. So being sure to tip pinch or just remove or shear if that variety can take it right after they've flowered. Let's see, tipping and then you can tip or light prune any of that new vegetative growth that's coming on. I have a note here that you don't want to cut branches that are larger than like a pencil thickness, because that they're more likely to, it's a bigger cut, slower to heal. You're getting into like the fungal infection territory, right? So we just don't want to be cutting too big of branches. The bigger it is, the slower it is to heal, right? And something like, I think I mentioned this already, but the green bark Ceanothus is, I believe, the only Ceanothus that has that burl, the Ceanothus spinosus. And so that one can be coppiced, and you can take it in late summer or fall. You can take it all the way to the ground to encourage those dormant buds. But yeah, these are all like, this would be an aesthetic approach to pruning your ceanothus. Manzanita, pretty highly variable we have here. Of course, there's many of them, just like the others, or just like the ceanothus and the sage. But a reason to prune, we have like aesthetic. Again, it might be to maintain a shape or potentially to reveal the like really iconic branches of manzanitas, right? You know, a lot of people want to have that being the showcasey part of the plant. So you might be pruning to like remove dead wood to showcase that. You would do that early spring before the new flower buds form. And this is because, so that like iconic, like twisted, irregular branching habit of manzanitas, that happens because of the flowers. But what happens is each flower cluster terminates that stem's growth. And so that shoot or stem, what ends up happening is the buds below it, they start to, the buds below it start to grow the stems, and they basically fork off. And then they set their flower buds sometime in like late spring. So like May, like late spring, early summer, like May, July. And if you prune those off early, if you prune those after that point, you're potentially pruning off the flower bud. So yeah, the flowers essentially, like, you don't want to remove them because obviously they're part of it and they make they're kind of a beautiful part of having the manzanita. But yeah, just something to keep in mind with them. So you want to be doing them early spring when they have that new growth, but they haven't yet formed that flower bud, and that you wouldn't be risking removing type thing. So at that point, early spring, before when it just has some new growth, you would be doing this like tip pinching or potentially like a light heading back. It says, yeah, you want to try pruning when it's hot and dry to limit any like spread of disease, because wet, cool conditions or wet and warmish conditions definitely lend themselves to fungal stuff, and we want to avoid that. And there's always some really hot day in spring in California usually. So yeah, so avoiding dieback, avoiding cutting when it's hot and dry to avoid something like dieback. And then in like a larger manzanita, you might prune the deadwood, and you could do that in early summer. Or deadwood isn't going to be flowering and have this issue that we've just talked about with the of being careful not to prune out the flower buds for the year. So the larger kind of deadwood below, you can cut when it's just hot and dry, which would be anytime in summer, and that would be like potentially just like reveal the structure below. But yeah, if you want to be heading back to shape it and add growth, you want to be doing that in early spring, and being cognizant of the fact that the flower buds will be developing soon after. Let's see, I guess, yeah, I'll just do these last little, let's see, yeah. So every week we talk about the kind of like additional fee-based opportunities that you could potentially be providing to clients. And in terms of pruning, you could just offer basically like an annual tree pruning, and that could be just offering like an annual cleanup with pruning, and potentially you could do the large trees also, and make a proposal for your clients. And you have to be like insured to do something like this. So if you're not, you would probably hire a subcontractor or something. But the idea here is that you would be proposing to do an annual tree pruning or landscape cleanup using healthy practices and clean pruning shears and like responsible waste removal, and taking into account like the wildlife, like, nesting seasons and whatnot. And then there is the fire zone modification option too, which is just cleaning and pruning according to the, like, whatever restrictions or fire safe restrictions someone might have locally. And you offering that service as like a educated California native plant landscaper, as opposed to if the city comes through and it's just like, oh, this doesn't fit with our fire safe guidelines, they're just going to cut it however they want, whenever, and just remove it based off of like the measurements, based off of how far it is away from your house. And so if you offer it, you can offer it in a way that like takes into account the health and the beauty of the plants. And that's something you could offer. I have a video and a poll. I think it's next, which is just LADWPs kind of, had a video earlier, which was also LADWPs. And it's just kind of like how to prune a plant. This is a very generic kind of video, but since there is none of that in this lecture, and obviously Catherine will go over this in the workshop, but here's just like a general video for that. Ooh, I hope this is not, well.
Plants that are appropriate to our client use less water will help our client save money. One of the most important things to remember while maintaining these beautiful sustainable gardens is to properly prune the plants in the yard. Some people don't know that every cut makes a wound, and plants don't heal. They must seal over the wound. So you should always have a good reason for each cut. Remember, the first reason to prune or trim a plant is to keep it healthy. Here are some reasons you may want to remove a branch. When they're dead, look for branches with dead leaves or shriveled blackened buds. To check, scrape the bark to see if it's green underneath. If it's brown, you know the branch is dead. When there is disease, look for sunken areas that are oozing or discolored along branches or trunks. If they are, prune the diseased branch back to at least 6 inches below the diseased area into healthy wood if possible. When there is damage, if there are broken branches, make a clean cut to a bud on a young stem, to another branch, or remove the branch entirely. When they're deranged, this includes branches that are rubbing against each other or the trunk. You'll need to choose one to keep and prune the others out. Don't forget, never leave a stub. When this happens, the plants sprout weak branches called water sprouts, creating crowded branches, unhealthy plants, and more work for you. Here are some tips to avoid this. Remove whole branches all the way back to the bulge at the base of the branch. This prevents water sprouts and enables the plant to seal over the wound. If you must shorten a branch, prune it back to another branch that is at least 1/3 the thickness of the part being removed. On young 1-year-old branches, you can shorten them by cutting them to an outward-facing bud or back to another branch. Lastly, never prune trees or shrubs into balls or other shapes. This creates lots of stubs, lots of work, and is harmful to plants. This kind of thoughtful pruning maintenance will grow healthy, thriving plants. Thank you for maintaining sustainable gardens.
Okay, so, oops. Ben, do you have that? Well, actually, before I get into the poll, so yeah, I think the message here, again, Catherine will go over this in the workshop, but the message here is just, or like a little bit of visuals for pruning, but also thinking about each pruning cut and what is the goal behind it. It's not just to prune. It's like, what's my goal here? And is this necessary? What am I trying to do? Am I trying to rejuvenate the plant? Like, is this for a plant health reason? Is this, what am I doing behind my pruning, and being kind of intentional about it. So I have this poll that I've like created that's just essentially like trying to kind of think about the like thinking like you would in real life, which is like in person, you're not just gonna be like, oh, here's the thing. You have to take into like all the factors into consideration. So health and the condition and this given scenario of the plant, but also like, what does the owner want? Like, what is their aesthetic? What do they like? Have they given you any clues or told you like what they want specifically for their landscape? And so I have a poll here that Ben can throw up that's essentially just like giving you a scenario and asking you to like think through it with a client's aesthetic in mind. So let's see.
I'm ready. Just say, Ben, launch the poll.
Ben, launch the poll.
All right.
Okay, so you have a native garden client who loves wildlife with a large, with a large 5-year-old toy on, and it's grown as a hedge. it is late summer and there are a bunch of spent flowers all over it, when do you think it would be the best time to prune this toyon? So would it be immediately? And we're saying it's summertime. This is the scenario. It's summertime. So would you do it immediately in summer? Would you wait a couple months until fall, or would you wait until winter? And so when you're thinking about this, essentially it's like you have a you have a client who's expressly stated they want birds and bees, and they want to provide habitat and food for wildlife. So that would be something you take into consideration. And then you have the age of your toyon, what time of year it is. I'm assuming everybody has sent their, you want to show us the results, or are they in? Are they in?
Results are still coming in.
Okay.
Coming in. I think we've got.
I guess, yeah, think about it, guys.
I'm going to end the poll. Looks like we've got most everyone now.
This feels like a trick question.
I love trick questions, Catherine.
I feel like I have reason to say none of those answers are right.
So yeah, so like, I mean, the thing is, so what I'm thinking about here, there isn't totally a right answer. I kind of feel like there is sort of a right answer. But the idea here is like, this person wants wildlife. Toyon, definitely, we want those berries, right? And like the other name for toyon is Christmas berry. So we know it's gonna put on these berries, you know, sometime in winter. And so if it's got a bunch of flowers on it that are spent and like busted. And so if we prune right now, we're ensuring that there will be no fruit this year, right? Because if you remove the flowers, they can't develop into their fruit or develop into the seed. So this, for me, I'm like this client has expressed they really like the birds and wildlife. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to remove the flowers because I want them to have the berries later. So summer, I would say no. And then fall, because it's kind of a trick question because we talked about this rule for shaping after flowering, right? And then rejuvenating in fall, we talked about, which doesn't really hold up in this case. And actually, I would say winter, which is like once they have berries on them, and you can obviously leave them, but you could be like late winter and potentially be pruning, you know, when you're like collecting the berries, if you make any like Christmas decoration or whatever, you can also be pruning them at this point. And really, like for optimal berry production, you should prune them in winter. You can also prune them in early spring, after the berries. But I think for people that aren't familiar with toyons and maybe don't feel confident, because essentially, anyway, if you're not like confident about identifying buds and stuff, I would do it in winter, because at a certain point, I didn't give you the option of early spring, but that is doable also. But early spring is like, you would want to do it right before the new growth. And yeah, so I think it's like, if you're not familiar with identifying those, and you don't want to do it too late, because then they would be starting to form their flower buds and you could potentially remove flower buds. But again, like an experienced pruner like Catherine probably would be able to do it spring and be fine. But I would say if you haven't ever pruned a toyon before, you could easily do it in winter when there's berries on it, because there's plenty for the birds, or late winter when they are starting to, you know, like January or something, even though they still have berries on them now. But what do you say, Catherine? What's your rationale behind it?
Yeah, I would just say wait till the berries got picked off by the birds, but before it starts heating up for spring, because the warm weather is what signals it to start growing new leaves. And right now, even in February, there's still toyon there's some that, you know, the birds have picked them all off already, and some that still have them on. I would just say leave them as long as the birds can eat them. Alternatively, you could, if they're ripe, you could still prune them and then leave them about in your yard to get picked off the ground or somewhere else as well. So if it's a wildlife attracting thing that the homeowner wants, which I hope is everybody wants that, but you'll want to leave the berries on as long as possible for the birds. And so that might time your pruning slightly later into winter or early spring, like Claire said.
Yeah, so honestly, like I don't have anything, I believe I don't have anything else. Let's see if there's any, oh, homework, that's right. What time is it? Oh yeah, we're way early. Homework, so the given one, and I believe what is in your workbook is sort the flashcards into groups with similar pruning needs. But I don't know how I mean, I don't know how you're going to send that to me via email. And I don't really want a picture of a bunch of the flashcards. So you guys can do that. I think that's perfectly fine too. But I kind of think it might be more helpful, or if you want to be emailing me something, I'd prefer if it was just, maybe take a picture of a native plant that you, have your eye on, and like, assess it, determine its best course of pruning, giving its like, condition and its aesthetic, so you can, some people did this, actually, it was really nice with their homework from last week. So with the pest, so you give me like a little bit of information about this plant. How old is it? What's it struggling with? What's it look like? You can take a picture or not. You can just describe it if you want. And then, give your rationale for what you're thinking in terms of pruning. Like, I'm thinking about pruning it this way because I want to rejuvenate it. Like, what's your reasoning behind the cuts? And how you would go about doing that. When would you do it? And again, you can use your maintenance data sheet to refresh your memory or anything like that. But I think the second activity is more helpful and also more friendly to email. So please do the second one. And yeah, nothing happens if you do the first one. Nothing happens if in any of the cases. But I suppose we can just do our Q&A, because that's all I have. I'm gonna get rid of, does anyone need, I guess I'll leave this up in case anyone wants to write this down for their homework, but